Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guests are Max Bliss and Michael Murphy. Michael and Max are two of the most empowering voices in the ongoing effort to stop geoengineering. Both gentlemen, along with colleagues from across the world, recently attended this month's United Nations Climate Conference, which took place in Paris, France. This conference, along with previous conferences held earlier this year in California and Copenhagen, are attempting to set the stage for the December UN meeting where the wheels will be set in motion to legalize geoengineering and the enactment of over 500 climate laws as part of the elite agenda to implement a one-world government. In this discussion, Max and Michael will offer their thoughts and perspectives on the progress being made to halt the geoengineering programs, along with the challenges still ahead of us. To kick the conversation off, I asked Michael if he could give us his thoughts on the inroads being made regarding the scientific community attending these conferences. And here is what he had to say.
I would say that the progress that we made was made on a number of different levels. I was skeptical at first about going for a couple of reasons, but you know, at the end of it, yeah, it was not only a learning experience, but for the activist community, it was definitely an educational experience. And many of the scientists were very open to what we had to say, open to the idea of geoengineering. So it was an opportunity to go into the devil's den, so to speak, and really talk about the agenda, talking about, you know, the main points being weather control, geoengineering, weather modification, definitely not being included in the climate models, and therefore, you know, being that this big algorithm, this big component of climate change is missing, you know, it was safe to come to the conclusion that the models were flawed, you know, and fraudulent, obviously, by those who are in the know. But it was a very important meeting, not only to gather information for an unconventional shade of gray, but for the activist community as a whole. As you know, there were many of us who were out there to really bring geoengineering on the table in a number of the sessions that we went into, and also during breaks. We had a great opportunity. Max, as well as all of the other activists, just did a wonderful job in terms of making connections, building rapport with many of the scientists and even government officials. So it was very important, and you know, I'm very proud of everybody.
No, I'm telling you, when I saw the updates on Facebook, it put a smile on my face because it really, well, first of all, let me just say this. Like you said, Michael, it's insight into what goes on behind the scenes. Now, I was thinking to myself as I was watching the updates by yourself and Max, what would, you know, nobody would know anything about what goes on there if you guys weren't there reporting back. And I think it's so important to be able to, you know, to get a glimpse into what is going on within those four walls, within the confinement of those types of conferences. So I think you guys, what you did was an exceptional job. Seriously, nice work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, could we give a shout out to some of the other activists, Michael and Max, because I know it wasn't just the two of you guys. We had others there, and I just want to make sure that, you know, we give them accolades also.
Absolutely. We had Alexandra May Hunter. She was looking at the legal aspect and looking into all the laws and the health impacts. There was Patrick Roddy. And he did his own paper about geoengineering and the harm it's causing. And you had Terry Lawton from Ireland. He was just such a passionate man that was able to connect with so many people. His enthusiasm was just really, really electrifying. It was just fantastic.
Excellent. Now, Max, did you
and Olga Raffa, sorry, Olga Raffa as well.
Oh, Olga, yes.
She prepared something called the Directive, which was a document asking the government to stop geoengineering.
Okay.
So, and she asked a lot of really good questions as well.
Now, Max, did you do your presentation?
I did. I got to present my poster and speak to different scientists about it. We actually had a lot of access to scientists. I got to speak with a lot of people, and I have to say that some of them were completely understanding what we were saying and could gauge our understanding what the motivations were, especially people from developing nations like India or Ethiopia or Congo and places like this, the ones which are really have been exploited for many, many years, they did not really have any problems comprehending what we were sharing with them.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
it was really good. And it is interesting talking to some of the scientists from other places, like the UK or America or whatever. You know, some of them were uncomfortable. Others were listening. There were some guys from Australia who completely understood and were able to corroborate what we were sharing by telling me about different papers that I might have missed and things like that. And they registered the extra increase in aerosols in the atmosphere at particular times. So it really helped to fill in more information for the bigger picture.
That's it.
What I found surprising, and maybe it was just me, is that it appeared that many of these scientists were not aware of the spraying. I mean, did I read into that correctly as you guys are doing
Yeah.
the updates?
I think it depended on what field they were working in, but there were clearly some scientists who didn't even know what a contrail was.
Yeah.
They didn't understand what's a contrail. It's that's a condensation trail left behind the airplanes. There's lines of clouds in the sky. Oh, okay. So some of them didn't even know what that was. So it's incredible that we're there educating them as well.
There was a large degree of compartmentalization. So a scientist might have certain funding in a certain area, and it could be atmospheric aerosols, but then they're not funded to find out what the source of those aerosols are. So they naturally assume it could be from a volcano eruption or something
Pollution.
else. So yeah, from pollution or a number of different sources. So, with the way I came away in terms of how funding is used to sort of bring about the agenda. Scientists are funded with specific grants that have specific goals and objectives, and as well as boundaries. So they're stuck between those boundaries, and they actually become experts within a very small part of the big range of things. So it almost seems like many of the scientists, if not all of them, are locked into this little area of expertise, and they're not able to see, or not willing to see, probably due to funding and other issues, the bigger picture in terms of what they're involved with.
There were also some scientists we spoke to who were completely waking up. You could see their reactions. They weren't necessarily poo-pooing it. They were taking it all on board, and they really wanted to know more. They took information from us. But when we approached them at a later date, their attitude had changed slightly, as if they'd been warned off, or if they'd had time to think about it and decided it was too vulnerable for them, because they're in vulnerable positions. Their whole careers could be destroyed. There's a very sophisticated machine of control for these people with their careers. But I know, even though they may have shied away, we planted a lot of seeds. We really made some ripples, and I know that our effect, we won't understand the true effect until some time goes by. And obviously we've got some people to connect with and to follow up, leads to follow up. And I don't think our impact at that conference is yet to be fully appreciated.
Okay, I was going to ask about that. Let me ask this question, because maybe in the audience they would be wondering the same thing. How does this culminate, Michael and Max? In other words, when they get to December, how does that formulate? How does that come together? You have all these scientists, as an example, in the July conference, the conference you guys were just at. How does that come together? I mean, who is pulling that together? Who's going to put together the proposal, if you even know the answer to that?
The proposals are already being developed largely, and probably already drafted. They didn't share specifics with us, but what a lot of the scientists were there to do, were there to essentially, it was almost this fear porn that they were selling, in terms of, in 10 years, we're projecting that due to climate change, the world, the sea level will rise X amount of feet, and cities will be under, and all of this irreversible climate change. So what our objectives are, and this was their message, is to bring about this agenda.
Sustainable development, Agenda 21.
Yeah, anytime
repeat.
Yeah, here's sustainable development. That means loss of money through taxation. That means loss of privacy. loss of land, loss of rights. That means complete world governance and stripping away the sovereignty. So it was interesting because essentially what this was, it was a precursor to forming world government. They are using the issue of climate change, or what they are saying is catastrophic global warming, which is obviously, as we're aware, caused by geoengineering, largely, if not all. But they're using this fear, this concern, and the scientific community, because I think a lot of them were had very good intentions to bring about this global agenda. So I asked the question in one session when they were talking about sustainability at the local level and talking about different strategies to bring this global governance agenda to local municipalities. And bottom line, we have a very diverse governmental structure, especially in countries like the US, that were designed to protect the freedoms, such as a constitutional republic. And I said, being that we have such a diverse model, what is the strategy to bring or to overcome local municipalities that are resistant? And there was a board of maybe 5 or 6 scientists, and they kind of stopped and looked, and nobody really had an answer. And bottom line is, we have a lot of diversity, and I said it will be a challenge for you to obviously bring this to fruition because of this diversity. And one scientist, she mentioned a certain country, and I'll have to look back at the footage. It will be in an unconventional shade of gray. She said, well, using this country as an example, that they're actually suing local municipalities if they do not come in line with this agenda. So that appears to be what the strategy is and will be. And I think we're coming into there's no question about it, we're coming into a very oppressive time, utilizing a several thousand-year-old agenda to bring about global governance. And I think we're in some world government. I think we're in a very, very dark time if we allow this to happen.
Yeah, so it's Agenda 21, right, Max?
It's they mention, I don't know, they mention it in every single session. Every single session. They didn't mention Agenda 21. They just mentioned sustainable development.
Yep.
Because everything has to be sustainable. But it was certainly that that was the main focus of the whole conference. For me, that conference is about consensus setting with all the scientists, so they're aware of the current consensus. Not a true consensus, they're just setting the consensus. So that's where they know, that's what they need to be educating the masses with. It's almost like that conference was there so to educate, set the latest consensus, so that those scientists will then go out and disseminate that information as if that is the consensus, where they've just been instructed. And every single session was about sustainable development. This is the real agenda of climate change, is to bring about this global treaty that people are going to have to adopt. The people aren't going to get a choice about it because the government's already signed up to it. And of course, the latest version is called the United Nations Post-2015 Agenda, which is basically an updated version of Agenda 21. But interestingly, Lexi attended one particular session where they were looking about how to strong-arm, that's my dog,
That's okay.
how to strong-arm nations who would be reluctant participants. They have got documentation about how they're going to bribe people within governments of reluctant nations, or they're going to introduce a system of penalizing nations so that they can bully them into acceptance. So they are preparing for some sort of resistance, and they openly talk about penalizing them, and they openly talk about bribing them. So they've got a mixed package. However, whichever system will work best for them, if they're unbribable, then they'll penalize them. And this is about strengthening the global trade system. This is a very, very important document here, where they literally will say how to entice reluctant countries. Perhaps the most important challenge for long-term management of climate change is getting countries that do not want to spend their own resources on mitigation to do more. I call these reluctant countries, because these countries do not put global warming high on the list of national concerns. They will not do much to control emissions, except where those efforts coincide with their national goals. Outsiders can change these countries, outsiders can change how these countries calculate their national interest by threatening penalties, such as trade sanctions, or offering carrots, such as funding for investments that lower emissions. Outsiders can also provide information on global warming dangers, which will in time help reluctant countries see their interests differently. So, I mean, this goes on and on and on. They are literally, they're preparing for full implementation of one world government, and it's through sustainable development being implemented because the widely accepted fear of global warming, which of course is ridiculous because we've had no global warming for 18 years.
Right.
You know, they've got a problem. Overall global warming hasn't happened. You know, they've got strategic global warming because they're using geoengineering. They can have extremes of weather, which they might be able to attribute to this global warming theory. But we know that that's geoengineering, climate engineering, weather modification. So they're actually doing targeted ozone depletion. They're increasing rainfall. They're creating droughts in other locations. They're bringing about these extremes, which are being blamed on this theory of global warming. And it's all to bring in sustainable development, Agenda 21, our communist future under climate change.
Yeah, that was kind of the joke. Our common future under climate change was the name, but you know, those of us who are aware of political strategy, what really shocked me was I interviewed a couple of scientists while I was there, one from India, another from California, and really liked both of the scientists, but the way that they've been taught in the scientific community that these types of political strategies were a good thing. So they're saying, yeah, we hope, you know, that we can see the change at the local level, bringing this about. And, you know, if we can't get people to cooperate, then I think, you know, it would be a good idea is sort of the mindset to put sanctions or various manipulations to change our political structure. And, you know, it's the deception of the system is so shocking that we have these brilliant people that had an incredible amount of data inputting into their minds.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, you know, as being a computer, data in, data out. And these people are considered some of the geniuses around the world. However, they're not seeing the whole agenda. And that's very shocking because we have people who are brilliant, you know, using that brilliance really to bring about something that is not good for humanity, not good for any of us, including their families. You know, and I think it was very important for us to get in there, speak to them. And also, you know, I was very happy in the sessions to see the various geoengineering was brought up at most, if not all, of the sessions that we were in.
No, I don't think geoengineering was really.
Well,
I think it was undercovered. There was personally, I feel that they almost were reluctant to talk about geoengineering.
Let me rephrase that. We, the activist community, inserted the issue of geoengineering into all the sessions. However, it was very, as Max said, it was very hush-hush, you know, in terms of...
Mostly talking about carbon dioxide removal. You know, SRM was mentioned a few times, but quite marginally. But the thing is, what they want to introduce is a carbon neutral society. They're trying to demonize carbon dioxide so much that everybody is going to willingly accept we need to make these changes. You know, you've got the big oil companies who are actually prepared to move to this time when we don't depend on fossil fuels anymore, and they can have an even better monopoly on energy supply. People think, big oil's against the global warming thing. Of course they're not. They're the same people.
Right.
They're the same people who own big oil are the people, you know, the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, the rest of them. You know, they're all the same people, and this is all part of the deception to give this impression that there are opposing forces at the bigger stage, the bigger players. But the truth is, they actually are preparing to maneuver into a better monopoly for themselves. They are behind renewable energies. BP is one of the biggest solar panel people, and obviously I'm not against solar panels. I want everyone to have them for free. But you know, the idea that big oil is against this global warming movement, that's just a misnomer. They're controlling it. They're most definitely a part of it. And in fact, moving away from big oil, I just happened to notice that one of the people here who are behind strengthening the global trade system, which is shifting to a carbon-based trade system, is Chatham House, the Royal Institute on International Affairs, which is basically the British version of the Council on Foreign Relations. So these are the NGO companies that the establishment use to control our destinies, that shape society. It's social engineering as much as geoengineering. And we have got the most insidious organizations in the world right at the heart of this whole agenda. It's incredible. It goes all the way to the very, very top. You know, this is their goal for one world government. They're all in on it. They want it. They want everyone to be have transhumanism. They want us all to have smart dust inside our bodies. You know, transhumanism is a part of the issue. It's strange, it wasn't mentioned at this conference, but it was mentioned at the Berlin Climate Engineering Conference about transhumanism, because basically they would like a world where everything is connected by the Internet of Things, where basically technology is in everything. That's what the bioeconomy is about, and that was mentioned. Bioeconomy is the Sustainable Development Food Program, where they're going to use emerging sciences like nanotechnology, bioscience, and all these, there are many more emerging sciences to merge with biodiversity, so that basically everything will be connected, everything will be controlled, your every movement be monitored. They'll even have plants that will indicate when the irrigation system needs to water them, so they can water the minimum amount of times, because they'll have sensors built into the genetic structure of the plants. They've even got new plants that have pesticides genetically engineered into the plants that they secrete. When they secrete liquid out of the plant, that is its own pesticide. And of course these harm bees and other pollinators, which just fall straight into the arms of Monsanto. You know, that basically the corporations are only there for the bigger agenda to, you know, corporations and government. I don't even know which one is which, but they're so, I don't even know if there's a difference really, except for the structure. But realistically, the people running the governments and running the corporations, they have the same interests, or they're linked by the puppet, the handlers, whoever it is. They're basically moving towards this in unison.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that there is a global, a worldwide infrastructure in place, and just listening to everything you guys are saying, it's like a bad dream. It really is. You know, I mean, they want to control everything. You know,
it's awful, but you know, I think that the more we learn about it, and the more people also decide to find out more about it, their deception, it does rely on a mass deception. This relies on everyone being fooled by all the lies. And I think that as more and more people begin to realize, actually, this agenda is being misrepresented, and it's really about taking away our freedoms and giving the oligarchy, the ruling elite, the final power game that they've always wanted to achieve, which is one world government. You know, they weren't happy with their empires in the past. They weren't happy with their colonies. Now they want the whole world.
Yep.
And it's like the final great game for them. But I think if enough people realize what the mass deceptions are, especially those in the establishment, those are the people we'd like to wake up the most, then I think that actually there'll be a huge paradigm shift, and this ruling elite will be exposed for the criminal elite they really are.
And,
right.
and Max, I think it's happening. We're seeing that shift, and awareness is very important. And the reason why, because awareness can lead to action. So, you know, awareness alone is not going to change our current system, but it's those taking action. So what different forms of action can we take? And right now, I think the battle truly can be at a number of different levels, but at the local level, I think it's very important. So we look at what the establishment or what the opposition's agenda is, and that is to, from the global level, implement, and implementation was a huge word. So implementing at the local level through quote unquote sustainable development. So I think if we act at the local level, we can have an impact at the national level, but that has to be done by the masses. And if we put our local legislators, state legislators, even legislators from certain countries, if we put them on notice, if we let them know, you will not be supported in any capacity if you support this climate change agenda. you are being put on notice and you will not have a job, you will not have a career, you will not be able to walk down the street in our local city. And that's the kind of pressure that we have to insert. However, I think it's also important to educate, to go in to build rapport. I think that's always the first strategy. You want to go in, you want to build rapport. We're not here to make enemies with anybody, but I think at the local level, a lot of people are not aware. And when the Obama administration, which right now has the Climate Re-Education Committee. It's 23 different mayors and governments from around the world that are going into local municipalities with grant money and with these Agenda 21 objectives. And they're literally buying this agenda into local levels. So we look at the monetary system, how the monetary system has been utilized where we could create deficiencies in certain governments around the world. So they have, a vested interest or a monetary interest to accept a lot of what they're calling grants. And I think Max stated it better. It's really what it is a bribe, but it keeps their governments running. It gives them the ability to continue. And that's what they're using. They're using the monetary system to manipulate and to bring about this global change. However, we do have such an opportunity to reverse this. And I think once people really, and what I'm hoping to do with an unconventional shade of gray is really outline, and that's the third film we did, What in the World Are They Spraying? Why in the World Are They Spraying? But really outline how this agenda, has been created by geoengineering being the biggest climate force, or creating the changes that we're seeing in our climate, and fraudulent, obviously missing from all climate models. Essentially, my hope is to activate people and show people, real possibility. We're looking at a removal of rights on a number of different levels. And we took a drive out today. We're in France. Max took what I call the mystery mobile, his famous van. But, we were able to go out into different cities, and learn some things about the history today. However, under a carbon tracking system, we all use a certain degree of carbon, whether it's with our lights, whether it's driving to work. And what their objectives are is to reduce our carbon footprint by a considerable amount.
And limit where you can travel.
And limit where you can travel, not that everybody has to go out and drive 10 miles, 15 miles like what we did, but it might be a real possibility in the near future that we're only able to drive to work 2 days out of the week, and then we'll have
tariff on traveling.
Tariff. So if we go over X amount of miles, we could be heavily taxed.
Right.
But for
move
us to
people to cities, everything, the focus, everything's about future cities, and that's easier to control you. It's easier to control your movements. If you live out in a rural place, like I live in rural France, and if they put a tariff on travel, well, that would just cripple the majority. The French, of course, they have big cities, but the majority of people in France live out in the countryside. It's a large rural population. If they put a tariff on our transport, that's going to wreck the whole culture of the way people live in France.
Well, they've
got centuries and centuries of heritage.
They're trying to do that taxing by the mile in the United States. And a lot of these towns and states and cities are introducing it under the guise that, well, automobiles are becoming more efficient with their miles per gallon. And so therefore, the tax base has reduced. So now we're going to have to go to Plan B. But of course, that's just a masquerade. That's just to get everybody acclimated to being taxed to travel, to get in your car, go someplace.
Being taxed to travel, thus more controllable. And I look at the way that Max lives, and if you can see the countryside behind us, we're
show you. Quick look.
Yeah, we're in a beautiful area, and
yep, I could see.
Kind of look back to thinking of my ancestors and how they lived, and I think this was it. So it really touched me. However, through the system, what it will do or could do if we allow it to go through, it could prevent Max from traveling. And through taxation of driving his vehicle, which he does construction. So his income source could be, and would most likely be, dramatically reduced, and thus forced to go into the city.
That's one of the things they're saying, that people will be forced to go and live in cities for economic reasons.
Right.
So you can imagine that they must have a whole raft. We're already experiencing austerity, which is designed. All the austerity, all the poverty we're experiencing today has been part of a 50-year deindustrialization and poverty plan, because they want to appeal to everyone. The weaker we all are, because we've got no money, no resources, the easier it will be for them to force new regimes upon us. So they are preparing for this, and they say economic measures will force people to live into cities. So all they have to do is start increasing the cost of living, increasing the taxes, adding tariffs to travel, and it will be just impractical to live out in the countryside. You know, it's appalling what they're planning. All kinds of leverage they want to introduce to manipulate us.
And I think it's very important to illustrate a lot of most of the scientists that were at that meeting. You know, they believe that CO2 is creating most of the climate change that we're seeing. Obviously, geoengineering is being left out of the equation. So based on this sense of fear that they're selling, that, you know, this could be the end of the world if we don't take these drastic measures, you know, they're looking at this as being something, well, we're all going to have to work together, we're all going to have to give up our freedoms. And I think the general view, based on who I was speaking with, and it was a number of scientists, was really that these measures were good. And from my perspective, I see it very clearly. This is about a consolidation, a massive consolidation of both monetary and political power into the hands of a few at the expense of all humanity. I did an update, you know, and I said, you know, the basis of this is to demonize carbon. In the consensus at this meeting, definitely not in the scientific community, was that carbon is the biggest climate forcer and is creating all of these changes. That's very debatable in terms of, obviously, geoengineering is the biggest climate forcer. Again, I keep on stating this because of the importance of it, but being left out of the equation. So the attack is on carbon, and being that we all have a carbon footprint, there's no question about that. There is an attack on carbon and thus humanity itself.
Exactly.
And
right.
The attack on humanity is the way to bring about this governance, and we have to continue looking at this, and I can't stress enough, geoengineering is how they are bringing this about. It is creating the climate change that we're seeing. There's no question about it.
The droughts, the floods, the changes, the storms. They can use HARP to create that typhoon in the Philippines, the earthquake in Haiti, the tidal wave, the tsunami at the Malacca Straits in Malaysia. And each time one of the NATO military navies was standing there in huge numbers, ready to scoop in, like they had advanced knowledge that this disaster was going to happen, and then they can add geopolitical pressure to these governments. We are seeing the use of this technology to bring about these changes. This is purely the Hegelian dialectic, where they create the problems, they even usher in our reactions, and then they offer us the solutions, and the solutions are one world government through sustainable development through the United Nations.
And not only a manipulation, but a celebration by those who are being oppressed, ushering this in gratefully, joyfully, saying, we hope that we can come.
Activist groups to demand climate action.
Yes, I mean,
you're going to see it, more of those things.
We had millions of people around the world last fall marching, you know, demanding that our legislators do something about climate change. Well, I want to be very clear here.
Misinformed people.
There are many agendas under this umbrella, and one of those is the legalization, or should I say the open implementation, legitimization of geoengineering. So, you know, I realize there's been a lot of probably divisiveness and argument about supporting or, you know, promoting this global warming agenda. I want to be very clear about this. Supporting, if you're a geoengineering activist, supporting the global warming agenda does nothing to further our agenda. What it does, though, is supports the global warming agenda, which in turn supports the legalization of geoengineering. Now, as Max said, there wasn't much discussion at all about geoengineering. We did have a breakout session with Alan Robach and Ken Caldera, and I was able to communicate with them and ask them a couple of questions, which was somewhat informative, but we've been watching them and collaborating with them for a while about geoengineering schemes.
Collaborating?
I would say
trying to interact with them at
least.
Try they usually run away from us.
Yeah, they were pretty effective at it. It was a respectful dialogue. But so geoengineering was pretty much left out. However, the structure that they're building, even if, let's say January comes, is geoengineering going to be brought on the table and legalized? And the answer to that question is the structure is prime for them to bring in geoengineering and legalize geoengineering, full implementation.
I would say, though, that they deliberately decided for this conference that geoengineering would be left out, although we attended what sessions there were. I believe that the treaty, they're trying to minimise the treaty so that it's less contentious. Yeah. And then at a later date, once the treaty's in place, they can make amendments. The floods, the droughts, all these things are engineered using modification techniques.
No question about it.
So that creates, that's like these attacks on people, because it's weather warfare for geopolitical reasons. These are done to support the campaign so that the media can jump on it and say, wow, look at this California drought, it's a terrible thing. Of course it is, but that can be manipulated. They've been weather modifying there for 50 years in California,
right?
So if your agenda is to create enough of a stimulus that people believe your agenda and will acquiesce and go along with the changes that they're asking for, then they've won. That's what they've achieved, and that's how they can use weather modification for geopolitical reasons.
Now let me ask you guys, I'm looking behind you, and they must be spraying like it's out of control there, because when we first started this interview, the sky behind you, I saw a couple of trails, but it was basically blue. It looks like a complete whiteout behind you now.
Yeah.
We started watching this probably about 10 o'clock this morning, and we're actually flight tracking some of the flights. Remarkably, so, some of the trails did come up with commercial airliners, others did not. What we saw this morning was remarkable, and Max pointed it out. There were two trails that intersected each other. One was white, the other was blue.
Yeah.
It was definitely different. So the one that was leaving the blue trail, what did it say on Flight Tracker? Unknown or
is blocked.
Okay, so the term that it said was blocked, and I don't interact with Flight Tracker on.
That's unusual. The data for it registered there was a plane. All the details about it actually came up saying it's blocked. Wow. So a light blue trail crossing a fresh condensation trail. Quite a contrast in a difference, and I mean, where they crossed, it wasn't light refraction or anything. There was obviously something different in that trail.
Yeah, it was a different chemical mixture. Everything in the background, we've been watching this again since this morning. Slept in after a long week. We all worked very hard, and I'm very proud of all of us, as the activist group. But everything that you see in the sky is from aircraft. No question about it. This should be a beautiful blue sunny sky. So we look at issues, and I think we've gone over this probably, Mike, you and I probably 5 or 6 times, but we look at, the ozone depletion. We look at the blocking the sun and how that has fungal overgrowth, creates various forms of abiotic stress. These things are a real consideration and a real concern. And if it were only contrails, that would, I think, be I think that would be a case very strong for eliminating these types of engines, which, by the way, were eliminated with the high bypass turbo engine.
Yeah. We should contrails should be very, very rare.
They are.
Originally in the early scientific writings about contrails in the 1940s and the 1950s, most of the scientists at that time would have said that, or did say, that a condensation trail has discrete atmospheric conditions required to form a contrail, and those situations are incredibly rare. Yet we see planes delivering contrails every single day, and I think they are deployed contrails. There is so much evidence now that you just can't have the atmospheric conditions required for a contrail to form every single day.
Right.
And this is in mostly NATO countries. We talked to one scientist from India, and he said he doesn't see these things in the sky in India where he lives. Doesn't see it.
What was interesting, God, we have so much to say about this event. There was so much knowledge gained. I interviewed a leading climate scientist from India, and he was talking about aerosols and how that is affecting the climate in that region is specifically. Max started talking to him. I overheard him talking. I said, "Hey, I'd love to get an interview. I'm producing a documentary." And he said, "Yeah, no question about it. Black carbon is something that was introduced, and I think he's been measuring it. They sourced black carbon, which we have documents from. I believe it was
1974, Boulder, Colorado, and used for weather modification.
Using black carbon specifically for weather modification. I wrote geoengineering and the deliberate melting of the Arctic. We sourced some documentation on that to specifically melt the glaciers. So he noticed, coming from the Atlantic region, a significant amount of black carbon, which he said without question is a huge part of the equation of the melting of our glacier. And I know there's been a lot of debate whether glaciers, or maybe even in the Arctic, whether it's melting or not, but it seemed to be in the in the regions in India, they're definitely seeing a melt off. However, many scientists believe it's simply due to CO2. My interest was in him was talking about black carbon, how that impacted the climate melt, and does that therefore make the climate models flawed? And the answer, of course, was yes. You cannot come up with accurate climate models without including the black carbon, which is a form of geoengineering. And that's really the whole message that we're here to tell. The climate models are flawed, and they're passing laws. Right now, we have a carbon tax in California. There are millions of dollars, and California is ground zero for this entire agenda. So there's no question about it. If we look at the jet stream, it's being diverted up into the Arctic, and that's why California is warm, dry. The Arctic region is also very warm, but down in the Midwest, where I've been living for a while, it's very cold. We have I think we had the rainiest June since record keeping. It rained just about every day. And then, of course, Mike, when you and I were on the radio show back in February, it was, I think, 2 below zero in North Carolina, but It was 47 degrees in Anchorage. So we're seeing all of these anomalies and all of these patterns. And the ice melting, the glaciers around the world melting, is one of the main sales points that they're using to usher in this fear campaign of CO2 being the source of that. However, we have seen very little evidence, and Max came up with a great question, and we're looking for the data, and it was in terms of what degree CO2.
No, I don't know which question you're asking, but I asked a guy from the Tyndall Centre, which is the UK Climate Research Centre. I asked him, how long would the climate pause, which would that be, before you started to revise your global warming theory? How big a pause would it have to be to say, actually, we may be wrong? And he would not answer me. He would not answer me. He kept on deferring, and he would not answer. But, there's lots of confirmation we got that aerosols in the atmosphere are a very large part of the reason we've got warming, trapping in air. Also, like nanoparticles of aluminium can be used to warm the environment. There's a paper by Edward Teller in 1997 called Global Warming and Coming Ice Ages. So it was looking at methods of how to deal with either a warming period or a cooling period. And basically, by spraying aerosols, metallic aerosols, into the atmosphere, and using different electrostatic fields of energy, you could direct these particles, and you can create either a cooling effect or a warming effect. Now, looking at all the historical desires to control the weather and climate and the methods they were looking for, I would suggest that they are using these techniques now. And you've got people like Dr. Jasper Kirby of the CERN Institute in Geneva admitting or complaining that he was saying that the clouds are seeded by jets dumping aerosols into the upper atmosphere. Now, if you start filling or putting all these aerosols in the atmosphere, depending on how they're stimulated by various technologies, you can create a warming or a cooling. So, the fact that scientists are acknowledging that these aerosols are in the atmosphere and they're being dumped there, I think there is a signal that some members of the establishment are observing the development of this geoengineering, this covert geoengineering that's going on. And I live in hope that more of them will start to speak out as they realize the bigger agenda is about a global communist system based using climate change as the method to bring people into the fold. You know, it's let's create enough fear and people will give up their freedoms. But I would hope that more scientists will begin to come forward, and I know other scientists also have spoken out. I even came across a paper about a scientist saying that the chemtrails are causing stress to plants because of the extra aluminium in the environment, the raw aluminium, the aluminium oxide, not the aluminium we get that's tightly bound with other elements. Aluminium is such a volatile element that it's everywhere in the soils, but it's already locked away. It's nice and safe. It's not causing any harm. It's these nanoparticles which are dangerous, and they're causing problems to the plants and the trees, and even bees have got aluminium in them now. There's studies now starting to realize bees have Alzheimer's. But in conclusion, I think that I would say that with our attendance in this conference, we've certainly brought geoengineering to the table of some scientists that are unaware about the possible implementation of it right now. I think many of them are aware of it as a possible solution, but they might not realize it may already be implemented. So I think that was a significant part of it. And also many of them were even unaware of weather modification techniques, which is insane really, because they've been in development now for well over 100 years.
Terry Lawson at one of the breakout sessions asked, and I think the number, in Max, you might have a better idea of the specific number, there were how many hundreds of weather on the record large
there's
scale
nations. There are 42 nations.
42 nations.
According to the World Meteorological Organization, which is a part of the United Nations. There are 42 nations with full-time weather modification programs, and some of these programs they are. I mean, there's a list there. There's a list there. That's just one state in America. And one of those programs is over 184,000 square miles. So that's just one of these experiments. Just one of them is 184,000 miles, not included in any of these models about what effects there is on climate, and not even on In fact, Alan Robock said, "Oh, in my opinion, weather modification doesn't work." Which is a ridiculous statement considering they had the ENMOD treaty, the Environmental Modification Treaty, following the use of weather modification for warfare purposes in Vietnam. So, it's an incredible statement that these climate scientists would just shrug off weather modification. And I think the reason for that is because they just want to focus on demonizing the life-giving gas of carbon dioxide.
Right. Well, I liked what Terry asked. So in a breakout session, Terry from Ireland, he said, okay, we have documentation of these climate weather modification programs going on. Have any of these been considered in the climate models? And we have it on film, and this will be in an unconventional shade of gray. Silence. All the signs kind of looked at each other. No. And what that tells us, again, this is a major factor in climate change and being left out. So it's very clear to me, that there's no question. We have very flawed models and a very, I think, naive scientific community. And again, talking to these various scientists, as people, I like them.
Yeah, they're good people.
The interviews, the people who I interviewed with, who had diverse beliefs on this. I said, hey, we're all going to have dinner. We'd love for you to join us. Of course, none of them did, but people who I thought were very well-meaning people. But again, the degree of deception, and I guess there was a term that somebody used, and I hate to use it, but I think people being very deceived. Good, well-meaning people who are carrying out a very evil agenda, an agenda that is really against themselves, against us and their children and the rest of humanity, and thinking all in the while that they're doing something good with smiles on their face and a desire to push this agenda. So it really illustrated to me the power, that monetary power and the influence that it can have over an entire world, because we had representatives, again, from Africa, from every continent, every region across the world. And within this group, of course, there is not a consensus in this climate change debate whatsoever in the scientific community.
Skeptical. There's quite a few of them who are skeptical, actually, you know, in different elements of the program, which was encouraging. I think there was some.
It was very encouraging, and that tells me that we not only have hope, but we also have an obligation. Those of us who know the truth on this issue, who will not side with the oppression, with the political agenda, with all of these other things that are not in our best interest. And we have the ability through developing relationships. Now there's a time for confrontations, you know, and there's a time for all types of activism, but, you know, let's try and build those bridges. Let's try and win the ears of both our scientists and then also of our political representatives. You know, then we can go to Plan B and take more aggressive measures, as they are planning on doing. Right now, they're trying to go in without, you know, world government being established, trying to manipulate, trying to influence people at the local level to sign on. Of course, they have money to go in, and we have to, you know, utilize the power that we have. That's the power of love, you know, to go in, to communicate with people and show them what the truth is. And, you know, if they don't agree with that, then we can take some more aggressive measures, which might be, you know, legal action, putting people on notice, you know, other forms of nonviolent, peaceful activism, but effective activism. And there's a time for everything. There's a time for peace. There's a time for battle.
Yeah, I think we will leave it to the waking authorities, the police and the military, to take aggressive action. We are all about peaceful education.
No question about it.
We want actually to be able to maintain some sort of dialogue and discourse with these people, and we certainly wouldn't want to sort of overreact. And if by creating an aggressive interface, then that they're just no longer going to talk to us. So we have to maintain a certain amount of discipline and be able to communicate with these people. But, you know, with the NMOD treaty, by the way, go back to the NMOD treaty, the use of these weapons covertly, because weather weapons, weather modification against the will of the people, creating droughts, creating floods, harming people, thousands of people have died due to these weather extremes, that is breaking the treaty. These organizations that are a part of covert weather and climate modification using geoengineering, they have broken this treaty designed to protect people. That people are being harmed, people are getting Alzheimer's, all these diseases, all these asthma increases, all these different illnesses. These are a direct response of the use of inadvertent weather modification, whether it's spraying extra pollution, like putting extra sulfur into the marine diesel from 1967, following the United Nations Clean Air Act, when the diesel, the road fuel, had to have sulfur removed from it, but it didn't apply to marine diesel, so they put it in marine fuel. Then we started seeing shipwrecks for the first time. Millions of people die every year because of sulfur dioxide, because of this poison in the atmosphere, and they put it in there deliberately. So they are breaking the NMOD treaty. They are culpable, and that's probably why we see these geoengineers virtually running away from us. In some cases, some Mr. Caldera will run. He's very light-footed. He's like an antelope.
He did.
You know, what's interesting to me, guys, is that the fact that they have to take this very incremental, very methodical approach, to me, that only proves the power of the people, right? Because there has to be rhyme and reason behind as to why they have to take this approach. And in my view, it's because if the masses do awaken, this whole thing comes apart. It falls like a house of cards. So that's why it's very incumbent upon the people to understand that they have this power and to step up to the plate and start awakening to this.
Participation. People have got to realize, if let's say, for example, we were to put a package of information together, a bundle of evidence, and then get everyone who's willing to print that out and send it to every single government on the planet, to every different department they wanted. That's because a few people decided that that was the right thing to do. We'd be hoping to inform all those reluctant players, all those reluctant governments, and create a dent. People got to do that, though. We can't do everything ourselves. We need people to participate, and just confronting your politicians, even though your politicians may go through a preordained denial. The fact that you're putting them under pressure, and the more frequency of that pressure, that will start to challenge whether or not they move forward in the way they planned, when they realize they're going to come across opposition.
I agree with Max, and I think that we all have a part in this, but we have to recognize the sign of the times. And there's an old saying, which I think is very flawed, and that is knowledge is power. And I do not agree with that. Knowledge with action is power. So if I learn something or learn that my house is burning down, but I go to sleep, there's a good chance that I'll die,
Right.
So I had knowledge of the house burning, but I didn't take action. And I think that's where we're at in terms of politically. And I think right now we're looking at the opposition utilizing this whole agenda to come and take legislative and legal action. And if we don't address these two issues, I think we're looking at some very serious implications. However, when we activate, which we will, and which we are, and that's why I'm so proud of the activist community, that I was honored to be a part of here in Paris. You know what? That is where the rubber meets the road, and is where the change happens. However, again, when we released "When the World Out They Spraying," initially, millions of people saw the film within a couple of months, and I felt really good about that. Looking back 5 years later, I'm not feeling so good about what we did because it was only part of what we have to do. Now I'm looking at, ways to utilize the message and, through programs like this to encourage people literally to take action. And that's why we're moving forward with the next film. It's a call to action film. It's going to have very specific measures that we can take at the local and federal and international level, and that's the key to stopping this. Solutions. So we outlined the problem, okay? But if there's a problem and you don't take action, that problem continues usually to grow. Once you recognize a problem, then you have the ability, or should I say the tenacity, to move forward in addressing that. That's where we see change, not only personally, but in our impact on the world. And that's what we need to do, and that's where we're at. Right now, we're in a, trying not to be an alarmist, we're in an emergency, literally, legally and geopolitically. And
Right.
we have to address that on that level. And if we don't, it's going to be exponentially more challenging to stop it. So we have to look at our opposition and react, or should I say act, or should I say take action on those levels.
Yeah, you have to present the reality of the situation. Yeah, I mean, and look, we're at a point where we have to do something, plain and simple. Michael, how is the film coming along?
Film is coming along great. We released the trailer. You can find that at unconventionalgray.com. We need some more funding, so we need some angels. The first film, we raised enough money in about 2.5 months. We're looking at probably a little bit longer, in terms of implementation. We could probably have a film done first of 2016. Paris was, I guess, fuel to the fire. It gave me a greater depth of understanding in terms of what's going on, but also I had the opportunity to interview a lot of the activists, also a lot of scientists that gave us scientific information in terms of the models being flawed, and that's really the big part of the story. So my goal is not to really reach the masses that we reached with the first two films, but it's to activate, a remnant, and that's all that we need. This is not a popularity contest. It's not about waking millions of people up, although that's not a bad thing. But right now it's about really implementing our strategy and stopping this climate change agenda based on the fact that geoengineering is creating climate change. And that's where I think that we really have to be right now. Awakening people alone, just, again, awareness is not the solution to this problem. Awareness and then action, effective action. And when I talk about that, people say, yeah, we have to take action. Well, we have to take the right action, because if your house is burning and you tell people on Facebook your house is burning, but you fail to take action, your house most likely will burn down. If your house is burning, you let people know on Facebook, and some of the people come over with gasoline and throw gasoline on your house, guess what? Your house is definitely going to burn down. So if we talk about strategies, implementation in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, and be very prudent in the way that we move forward, then I think that we will have the change, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, it's about critical mass, right? I mean, it's critical mass. We have to get very informed people in action, boots on the ground, at a critical mass level.
And I think that we have that. I think that we had critical mass probably about a year in the just going out, I travel around the world. Now I can, thanks to Max and everybody else, I consider myself a world traveler. But yeah, it's people are waking up about this. However, activation, and utilizing maybe even the remnants of those of us who are aware of this with a very succinct, specific strategy. That means legal. And if you go to geoengineeringactionnetwork.org, I'm collecting names right now for a class action lawsuit, and we feel right now we don't have any attorneys who are spearheading this. We're certainly looking for them, but I think the most effective way to look at this is the climate change mandates, the taxes, which we now have in California, other areas around the world. Those are creating monetary damages, and they're moving forward with legislation, with mandates and taxation based on a flawed model and a model that does not have a consensus or a conclusion, that being CO2 being the driving force of climate change as the source of our global warming. There is not a consensus in the scientific community. There's no question about it, and we can prove the models are flawed, and therefore it's creating, at the very least, there are so many damages created by geoengineering, but through the legalization of this implementation of the climate change agenda, we have monetary, we have land, we have human rights issues that are being violated left and right. We can prove that.
Here in France, Mike, we had a terrible heat wave. And they mentioned this at the conference as confirmation of global warming. It was so engineered, it was ridiculous.
But they did mention when we were on air in February 6th or whatever it was, the -2 or 3 degrees in North Carolina.
Yeah, they wouldn't bring that up.
No, of course not.
Oh man, so you were saying though, but you had some fun there too.
We did, and for the activist community, it's such a serious issue, and we definitely
energy zapping, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be, and we take it very serious. But there definitely has to be an element of fun, and balance in our lives. And many of us want to take this on, 19, 20 hours a day, and I tried that for several years. It's not quote unquote sustainable. So we have to look at, the activist is an effective activist. So there's certain degrees of health, whether it's at the physical level or, the emotional level, and we need that rest. So it was great working with the other activists. We had fun, we bonded, and we went out to dinner every night and did some sightseeing. And that was important, I think, for us to, while we taught, pretty much we spoke about this, but we can have fun when we address this issue. And we can be serious, however, not give every bit of energy and allow this negative energy to come into our lives.
You need a little bit of balance.
You need balance.
It's so absorbing doing this that every now and again you've got to have a joke just to relieve the tension. It builds up.
Yeah.
Well, and the team aspect of it has to be very motivating because you're not doing it by yourself. You're there with others who are very smart people who've researched this.
Yep, and they each bring something unique to the table.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own approach, their own particular interest in this area, and their own particular passions. So together as an ensemble, that was a tremendous impact as well, because everyone was going out talking to as many people as possible at the conference, and each one has their own method of delivery, their own focus, which they're particularly interested in, and that actually would have sent a message as well that it's a complex group. It's not straightforward. They can't pigeonhole us as those chemtrailers.
Right.
Although we each have our own skills and specialities, and I have to say, I would like to reiterate that some people were saying this was a dream team. I would agree, because everyone in there was a vital cog in our wheel, in our machinery.
Yeah,
it was very good.
That's very good.
So where do you think this takes us, guys, as you go into the December conference? Does the picture change? Is it better, the same?
December is a planned game changer. However, I do feel at this moment, even if there's signing, there's a 5-year period of planned implementation. So 2015 or 4-year
2020 plan. Is the big year for them.
2020. Yeah, it's 2015 right now. So 2020 is the planned implementation. So we have an agenda which will be more clearly set out in December, and I hope to get back, here to France. But then right now, based on what we've learned, we can start taking effective and progressive action. My belief is, and I have hope in fellow activists, that we will block this climate treaty, which again, many people feel is very good, or derail it, and bringing geoengineering on the table. And the point is, they're definitely in negotiations right now. So the final draft will be ready to sign, and I'm sure it's very close in December. However, we have the ability today to take both legal and legislative steps to ban geoengineering and other forms of this oppression based on the fact that geoengineering changes our climate. So we have to get very active, and we have about 4 years. And I think that we will derail this, bringing about the favorable future that we want. And we definitely have the ability to do that.
So are you saying, Michael, that you'll be able to derail it come December or post-December?
I think both. You know, we have both opportunities, so we have to always have a plan B. And derailment might not be, that can be maybe viewed as a harsh term, but I think bringing truth, into the dialogue and creating or maintaining or turning around this oppressive government, this austerity that we've seen growing for several years. And this issue is key. Geoengineering is key to the climate change agenda. Climate change agenda is key to global governance. So we have to look at that. So we have to bring geoengineering into the dialogue legally. We can prove, A, that it's happening, B, that the models causing harm, and C, that the models are flawed. So if we would sit back and allow this structure to be implemented, then we would see the legalization of geoengineering, the inability to take legislative and legal action, and then I think it would be over. However, we're aware of what's going on. We have the insight to see it, and we have an activist group who's moving forward.
And well, I think we need to contact governments all around the world, scientists all around the world. We need to inform them with the necessary information so they can maybe make the decision from their point of view to back out, to take some time out and maybe avoid signing the climate treaty, maybe create some dissent amongst those nations who are going to be harmed the most. And first of all, we need to establish that there's a tremendous amount of harm that's already been done. There's a tremendous amount of harm because of this covert use of weather and climate engineering techniques. And I think that amongst us, we can do that, but we need help from more people within the establishment and the governments around the world that are not on board, that are not entirely on board. We need to basically shine a light on the dark deeds.
And I think that was a great idea by Max. If anybody wants to contact me to go to or see the updates from the conference on Facebook, go to my What in the World Are They Spraying Facebook page, and then you can also email me on my Facebook page, Michael J. Murphy. There are many of us, so you can find me from the What in the World Are They Spraying. We need help, to write this up and support, to work together to get this information out. I have, a pretty extensive network that I can send this out to. However, it would be very helpful for somebody to help write this up and support us in that way. So if you have the ability to do that, please, write me and we'll talk. And thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say your updates from both Max and Michael were great. They were very uplifting. They were motivating because, you felt like that we had the proper representation there. So we owe you guys and the rest of the Dream Team there a debt of gratitude. That's coming from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, and thank you to all those people that gave us donations. Yeah. And we're wishing as well. That kind of support was really, really important. I mean, all those people out there who donated, you made this happen.
Without question. You have much gratitude.
All right, guys. I want to thank you so much. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been very generous with it. And I'll have it out, and I'll email the both of you with the link.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Right.
Really appreciate everything.
Thank you, gentlemen. Bye-bye now. And that concludes my interview with Michael Murphy and Max Bliss, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to Max and Michael's social media and websites are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com, or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.